Hello, thank you for coming along to my webinar on cat body language and communication. I'm Lucy Hoyle. I'm a certified feline behaviourist and author of the book Your Cat Wishes You Would Read, which is available now. I've been a cat behaviourist since 2010 and in that time worked with hundreds, if not thousands of cats, so hopefully I'm in a good position to help you learn about your cat and their behaviour. So I'll be starting with a brief outline on how cats communicate and then delving into the ways they communicate visually and what their body language is telling us, how they communicate through sounds and what sounds they make and whether they're directed towards us or other cats, and then leading on to olfactory communications, which is communicating by smell and pheromones, which is one of the main ways that cats communicate. There's a couple of things to bear in mind when we're thinking about how cats communicate. The first thing is that they're descended from the African wildcat, and that is a truly solitary species. The second thing is that they're both predator and prey. So both these things shape their development. So being descended from a solitary ancestor means they haven't really had any need to develop really clear, obvious methods of communication with us or with other cats because they weren't really doing that. They were preferring to communicate over long distances, so scent marking, leaving their scent behind, picking up on other cats' scent later on. But also because they have this predator and prey mentality, they're motivated to keep themselves safe because they don't want to be picked off by a predator, and they're motivated to keep themselves healthy so that they are able to hunt, because in their minds, if they can't hunt, they're vulnerable and they might not survive. So they're not going to want to risk communicating with other cats face to face because there's risk of fighting, there's risk of conflict, and that's essentially going to be a threat to their survival. So their body language is very, very subtle. We can pick up on it, but primarily they prefer to communicate via scent, which obviously goes straight over our head. We're not going to be able to pick up on that. So there is a little bit of a mismatch here in terms of how they're communicating and how we want to communicate with them. But we can pick up on these subtle behaviours and we can really understand where our cat's coming from. So before we dive in, I just wanted to give a little flag here to the importance of taking into account the context that the cat's in at that point, because what you'll find is there's a lot of repetition as we go, and just looking at one particular body part can tell you one thing in one certain situation and a different thing in another. So for example, you'll notice when it's dark, your cat's pupils dilate so that their eyes can let in as much light as possible. But also when they're scared or stressed, then their pupils will dilate in that situation too. So it's not just a case of looking at your cat and being like, oh, their pupils are dilated, they must be scared, because again, it depends on what context they're in. And this really comes into play when we're looking at things like cat play as well. Like, how do you know if your cats are playing or if they're fighting? And I've got a couple of videos later on to talk through that behaviour there. But you will see a lot of the same behaviours in different scenarios. So we need to look at the context as a whole and the whole body as well, so we can get a really good picture of how that specific cat is feeling in that specific scenario. So let's begin with visual communication. This is the one that we prefer. That's how we tend to communicate. So we can look at the shape of the eye and the pupil shape, their ear position, the position of the tail, their whiskers and their fur. So when we're looking at eyes, there are two things to pay attention to. The first is the actual shape of the eye, and the second is the shape of the pupil, obviously inside. So generally what you'll find is that happy cats have soft and relaxed eyes, like the top cat here. His eyes are quite oval shape and a little bit soft and relaxed, and the pupil is thin. And eyes of an unhappy cat, for whatever reason that might be, they're a lot wider, like the actual shape of the eye is wider and that pupil is huge, as we said before, but obviously lighting dependent. And cats do a few cool things with their eyes as well. So the first one is the slow blink. And if you do this at your cat, you'll know just how lovely this behaviour is. It's like a little secret method of communication between you and your cat. So if you blink slowly at them, and if they return that to you, then that's like a little sign that there's trust between you. It's like a little greeting, and it's just a nice way. I like to think it's as if they're saying they love you and you're saying you love them too. So that's really sweet. And I often use the slow blink when I'm going to consultations because I want to gain that cat's trust and I want to know what that cat is thinking. So if I go into a cat's home who's scared or even being a bit aggressive towards their owners, I'm looking to get that slow blink as soon as possible, because once you've got that slow blink, I almost take a little bit of a sigh of relief, like, whew, okay, cool, this cat's okay. And I'm not going to push my boundaries with this cat. So hopefully for the most part, the cat will be happy and I won't get attacked or hurt, or I won't scare them either. So definitely use the slow blink with your cats you have at home and with any strange cats. I love it. I love giving them that little high. And yeah, it just makes you look a bit weird, doesn't it? Especially when I go into someone's house, I'm blinking at them like mad. I'm hoping that people know what I'm doing and I don't just look like I've gone a bit weird. Faux sleeping as well, that's quite an interesting one. The cat at the top here is sort of got their eyes closed, but they're still awake. So you can see for the cat's ear, she's paying attention to something that's happening around her because the little ear has swiveled in the direction of a noise. So she's not actually asleep, but she's laying here with her eyes closed. So just remember that just because your cat is laying there with her eyes closed, not necessarily sound asleep and still very aware of what's happening around them. And just wanted to mention a little note about pain as well. When cats are in pain, their eyes do tend to change shape. The pupils might be a bit more dilated than normal and they might have a bit squinty eyes. So I have a slide later on about showing a cat that's in pain, so we can have a look at the eyes there. But another thing to bear in mind that might sort of skew your assessment of what their eyes are doing. Moving on to ears, generally it's just the ear position that we're looking at. So the ears of a happy cat generally just upright and facing forward. And you'll see that if they're hunting or if they're chilling or if they're sleeping, they'll just be sort of pointing forward. Or turned in the direction of a noise. So the cat at the top here, so both ears can move independently of one another. So if there's a noise happening on your left-hand side, then just the left ear only needs to turn in that direction. And obviously that's what we can see here with that lovely cat at the top. Everything else about this cat is saying that they're relaxed, like their eyes are soft, they're alert, they're happy, they're upright, but just that one ear is turned to the side. On the other hand, ears of an unhappy cat, well, that can vary depending on how they're feeling. So this cat at the bottom here looks like they're feeling quite frustrated rather than scared because they've got like airplane ears. So it's almost like a straight line from one tip to the other. So that can mean that something's like bugging them or they're irritated about something, but not necessarily super scared. I've got a video on the next slide to show you like very scared ears, and that's when they'll turn right round and like they'll be pulled right out of the way. And that can be a cat that's like super scared and wants to get away, or scared and wants that they might attack. So we need to be mindful of their ears going right back. It's one of the most obvious signs. And if you're stroking your cat and their ears start going back, then you can think, okay, this cat's probably starting to get annoyed. I just wanted to give a little mention to breed issues here, because obviously some breeds, their ears have been bred to be different. So thinking of Scottish Folds, I can't think of anything else. Like, is there an American curl? And then the other cats that have their ears that flip back. I know Sphinxes or some like elf-eared Sphinxes often have different shaped ears as well. So obviously be mindful that you're not really going to be able to apply this to those breeds because their ears aren't going to work in the same sort of way. And I do think that's one of the issues of these breeds, is that they're limited in terms of their communication because they're not able to communicate as clearly with their ears as another cat with regular ears. And here's the example of a kitten whose ears have gone right back because she's super scared by something. You can see she does a little nose lick and some swallowing, so she's super stressed, but look at her ears, they're as far back as they could possibly get. The position of your cat's tail can tell us a lot about how they're feeling as well. So the position of a happy cat's tail should be upright and a little curl on the tip, depending on how long the tail is. And the very fact that they're coming towards you is a good sign as well, so that's all good. And if they're minding their own business, doing their own thing, then generally the tail should be loose and relaxed. So if they're curled up in a ball, then hopefully the tail is curled around as well, and it's still for the most part and not swishing around. And you might find that when they're hunting or something's interested in them, then you might see that it was held low but not tucked under and might look quite straight. And again, it can really help us understand when they're feeling unhappy. So what you can see from the cat at the top here is that they're a little bit unsure. She's not feeling very confident in this situation. You can see she's sort of leaning back as well. So her whole body language is showing she's a little bit wary. But that tail being held low, that's the most obvious sign that she's not 100% okay. Curled like sometimes the tail can be curled right under between their legs, and that's often when they're like scooting away from something, like looking to get away quite quick. Their tail is held sort of down as far as it can possibly go. On the other side of things, you might find when they're getting like annoyed by something or upset by something, then you'll notice that swishing or wagging. Obviously, that's totally different from a dog. A wagging tail is a bad thing for a cat. So you might see this in, like, if your cat's looking out a window and can see another cat outside and they're not okay with that cat, then you might start to see the tail start swishing or flicking. And generally, it's sort of like the more it's thrashing, the worse they feel, I think. I think that's right. Because if it's just a little flick here and there, then that's not so bad. But if it's proper thrashing, then you can tell they're getting quite upset. Again, when we're stroking cats, when we're looking to avoid like petting aggression or getting bitten when you stroke them, the tail is another good thing to look at, because you will see if it starts going, then they're starting to come to the end of how much they're enjoying that stroking. So it's a good time to stop. A little mention here to bottle brush tail. You can see in that picture at the bottom there, cats that are super scared and they're like panicked, then their tail can like brush up like a bottle brush or a toilet brush. And so you might see this behavior, like if they have a run in with another cat, they might come tearing in through the door and their tail is really bushy. So that's another good indication that they're not quite okay. Again, there's a few things to remember about tails. So I'm not sure if you are aware of the posture of when a cat sprays, but when they're Euromarking, what you'll often see is the tail goes straight up, and sometimes it does like a quiver. And you'll often see that sometimes they do this quivery tail without spraying. So some people call it fake spraying, faux spraying. Other people just put it down to excitement, or generally it's a good thing, but sometimes they can do it when they're feeling a little bit conflicted as well. So like if you see your cat doing like a quivery tail when, like, normally when you come home from work or they're happy to see you, it's generally a good thing, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to spray or they have sprayed somewhere. I've put a little mention here of hyperesthesia as well, because this is way more common than I feel like anybody knows. Or I don't know who's researching this, how many cats have hyperesthesia. Hyperesthesia is when cats have like a super sensitive area around the tail and like their lower back. So sometimes their tail can just thrash or flick or just as if it's got a life of its own. And it can vary. Sometimes it's super like mild and it doesn't really bother them. Other times it's so bad that the cat is just at the end of its tether with this tail just flashing around on its own, that they end up attacking their tail or hissing at their tail and looking like they're just trying to kill their tail, basically. And it can make them super sensitive to being stroked, and it can lead to aggression in other scenarios. So I just wanted to bear that in mind. Like if your cat's tail is flailing around on its own for no reason, like when they're trying to get to sleep, it might be worth speaking to your vet to see what might be helpful there. Tails will swish when cats are playing together. That is something that happens both when they're fighting and when they're playing, so it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does happen there. And the Halloween cat tail, I've got a video of that here. Again, we're back to this little kitten again, but look at her tail when she gets scared. It sort of takes on a funny shape that you don't really see anywhere else. So it's sort of like in like a little archway where it starts up and then it goes right back down again. And we'll talk about fur in a moment, but look at her fur standing right up there as well. So she's obviously very upset. But yeah, that Halloween cat tail, you don't often see that in any other scenarios other than when a cat is like spooked or scared or panicked. So it's obviously an indicator that your cat is not a happy kitty at that point. Whiskers is something that's referred to as a method of communication, but I personally find this super difficult to pick up on. So there are subtle differences. So normally if cats are like attacking, then the whiskers are held back and out of the way, I believe. Like you can see when this cat's hissing, her whiskers are pulled back, whereas the cat at the bottom, they're just like relaxed and sideways. They're not really pulled in any direction when they're a little bit like relaxed and calm. When they're hunting, then their whiskers will move forward and will sort of be wrapped around the prey that they've caught. And that's because they're not very good at seeing close up. So it's like compensating for the lack of, I don't know, sight in that situation. So they can feel the prey, they can't necessarily see it. And when we're talking about their fur, again, like I mentioned before, piloerection is like when the fur stands up on end, and that tends to happen when they're scared. So generally we're looking for a flat and smooth coat. Again, this is something that will be compromised with breed as well. Obviously, the Sphinxes don't have any fur at all, and some of the Rex breeds have quite short fur. And so, yeah, just bear that in mind when looking at fur. But again, you wouldn't really see the fur standing on end without some of these other behaviours that we've spoken about. So again, it's about looking at the cat as a whole and seeing what, in the context that they're in and as a whole, what we can pick up on. So I just wanted to give a mention to pain here, because cats are never very forthcoming when it comes to showing when they're in pain. So if we can pick up on the subtle indicators that they might not actually be feeling quite okay, then we can help get them veterinary care when they need. So this picture here is a really good picture in terms of like indicating when a cat is in pain. So thank you to the cat welfare group who shared this picture. I believe he has a fractured pelvis or a shattered pelvis, I think, if I remember right. So obviously he's in loads of pain here. But what we can see is that his eyes are tense, and like they are open, but not as open as fully as they can be. And I imagine that's because someone's approaching him. Like if we'd have seen him 5 minutes ago, I imagine they would have been almost closed. His pupils are super dilated, even though it's not low light there. And his ears are turned slightly. So you can see the back of his ears from the front. So they're not like pulled right down, and it's not like he's not super reactive here, but you can see they're just turned enough that you can see the back of the ear from the front. And that can be quite a big sign that your cat's not quite comfortable. The way he's sitting, his head is lower than his shoulders. He's quite hunched over. And you can see that his muzzle is quite tight. So where his whiskers are, it's quite thin, and you can see it sort of makes like a W, like a skinny W shape on his face. Whereas if you look underneath, there's the same cat. You can hardly believe it's the same cat. And that's him after he was treated. And obviously he's doing so much better now. So you can see his eyes are soft. His pupils are, I guess he's in the sun there, isn't he? But his eyes aren't dilated. His pupils aren't dilated. His ears are forward. His muzzle's a lot softer there. And he's obviously upright and feeling a lot better. So just bear in mind these little things that might indicate that your cat might be experiencing some sort of pain. So we've covered like body language, and then this slide is just generally talking about the behaviour of happy cats. So what we're looking for is a upright posture. We want them to be confident. We don't want them to be hunched or slinking away or sort of trying to make themselves as small as possible. We just want them to be relaxed and happy. You're looking for them to have a loose body posture as well. So like, it's really hard to explain what loose is, isn't it? But I'm sure you know what I mean. Like you can tell whether your cat is tense, whether they're on edge, whether there's something they're worried about, or whether they're just relaxed and loose. The orientation as well, like what way they're looking. That sounds so subtle and so silly, but it really is so important. Like if they're looking over to you and waiting for you to stroke them, waiting for you to interact and coming towards you, then that's a big indication that they want to interact with you. They're happy, they're in the mood for this positive interaction. Whereas if they're looking away or not approaching, then that can indicate the opposite. Leaning into you as well, isn't that just the most lovely thing? Like when you pick them up, they like snuggle into you and are really like trying to encourage you to stroke them and to give them that positive interaction. Approaching, like I said, especially with a tail up, like if you come in from work and they come towards you, that's such a good sign. It's just the same as the dog come running over with a waggy tail. It is just as positive, and we should appreciate that for what it is, because it's lovely. I love it. Social role, that I've got a video of that in a moment, I'll show you, but that's really good. A cat exposing their tummy for you when they're in a really relaxed and like comfortable place. It doesn't mean that it's a green light to touch the tummy, but I'm sure some of you can. And if they're initiating the contact as well, if they want you to, like if they're coming and rubbing their head on you, or coming and like pouring at your face or pouring at your hand and trying to initiate that contact, then these are all signs of a happy cat that is happy to interact. So let's look at this lovely Siamese in slow motion as well. But look at the way she's pushing her head into that guy's arm. She is really up for it, and her body language is soft, it's loose, her ears are forward. She's not trying to get away, she's not tense. So she's got a really good relationship with that guy, which is lovely to see. And here's the social role. So cats will roll over in lots of different scenarios. Like it could just be they want to get comfortable. But when there's a person around, you can pretty much count on the fact that it's a social role, and it's a positive behaviour. They're happy to see you. So now we'll look at the behaviour of unhappy cats. So separate to body language, now this is behaviour. So there's a long list here, I'm sorry, but in terms of what behaviours you might see, so they often swallow, yawn or lick their nose. That's something that's so often overlooked, but when you know to look for it, you see it so often. Their body posture, they might be hunched or crouched, especially if they're like walking through, like from A to B through the house, and they're crouched right down and like walking with their tummies low to the ground. They might have tension, you know, they're not loose. I mean, that's going to be opposite to the happy cats, but yeah, they're not loose and happy to interact. They're tense. They're like walking on a knife edge, basically. Orientation, they could be looking away from you or just not looking at you. I've got a video of this in a moment of a cat who was just not engaging at all. Leaning away. So if you're trying to, I see lots of times people go to straight their cat and the cat is like moving back, like, and just leaning away. That's obviously a sign that they're not ready to interact. Avoiding you, keeping a wide berth, like getting out of your reach type thing. And there could be behaviour problems. So if you're seeing any aggression, toileting in unwanted places, excessive grooming, although rule out any medical issues, and lots of hiding, then that can indicate that the cat's not happy. It could be because they're poorly, to be fair. So yeah, the cats that are showing this behaviour, something needs to change in their environment. We need to figure out what it is that's making them feel rubbishy, and then either change that, get rid of it, or encourage, like, find ways of helping them feel happier, basically. So a couple of examples here. Obviously, this kitten's not having a great time with that puppy. I presume that puppy's being very, like, friendly, but there's the nose lick. You can see the way she's pulling as far away from him as she could possibly get. She's being very tolerant, to be fair. Little hiss, and her ears have gone back. So there's that nose lick again. So she's being very tolerant. Lots of cats would not put up with this at all and would have run away. Although what I would say about running away is that a cat that runs will often be chased. So they know that as well. So they know that if I run away from here, I'm going to be chased. But that dog might not have chased her. But if that was a cat, then if one cat runs away, the other cat will 100% chase them, or let's say 99%. But this is why you'll often see cats that if they're in conflict, if they're outside in the street having a showdown, like a stare-off, often you'll see them move away in slow motion. And it looks weird. You're like, why are you creeping away like at 1 mile an hour? But it's because they know if they move any quicker, then the standoff ends and they'll be chased, and then a fight will probably ensue. So yeah, it's so complicated, isn't it? But yeah, this kitten's being very tolerant, but obviously very not happy at all. I love this video because this cat's being very stoic, like obviously not enjoying that interaction at all, but not doing anything about it really. And that person might be like, oh, he loves having his tummy rubbed. Let's do that again. But he's not engaging. He's not like, he's not giving her any attention. He's not orientating towards her. He's not rolling into her hand. He's not trying to face mark her. I presume he's not purring, although there's no sound. He is just not engaging. So this is not a sign of a happy cat, because we want to see all those positive behaviours. It's not just enough that he tolerates something. We want them to enjoy whatever it is we're doing with them. So yeah, be mindful that it's the positive behaviours that we're looking for, not necessarily the absence of the like unwanted behaviours. Okay, so I have 2 videos here. This one is like more than play. So it's not a serious fight, but it's not playful. And we know that because the claws are out. There's nose licking, so that cat's clearly unhappy or a little bit stressed. And they're very tense, like there's nothing loose happening here. But the ears are back and the tails are thrashing. Let's have a look at a play video. So for these cats, it's definitely play, but you can see the same sorts of behaviours. So the tails are going, the ears will be held back, but generally the claws are kept in, and you can just tell by their like posture that it's much looser, it's more wriggly, it's more roly-poly, it's just a bit more light-hearted. So these things are so difficult to pick up on, because how can you tell someone like how loose are they, how tense are they? It's so difficult to pick up on like these specific things. But when you look at it as a whole, you can tell the cats that are playing and those that are a bit more serious. Okay, so let's have a look at auditory communication and their vocalizations. So I've got a little list here of how they communicate using sounds. So we're going to quickly look at the meow, the purr, a chirrup, hiss, spit and growl, a yowl and a caterwaul. So meows tend to happen towards people or for the benefit of people. They don't tend to meow to each other. So this is something that they've learned, and this is why it can be very tricky to overcome a problem like excessive vocalizing during the night, because it's a learned behavior and we reinforce it all the time. So as soon as a cat meows, what do you do? Because I know when my cats do it, I go, "Oh hi, you okay? What's the matter? Do you need something?" And even I can see myself doing it when my cat does it, like in the night. I can hear him in another bit of the house, and I call over, "Are you okay up there? Do you need to come down? Sparkles, come on down." And I make a rod for my own back because now he does it all the time. He's like, "I'm here." So a meow is normally a positive thing. So it's a method that they've learned to communicate with us, which I'm wholeheartedly encouraging, because it's nice for us to be able to do that and to communicate in that way. But just be wary that cats that meow can be anxious or can be in pain. So again, look at the situation as a whole and get them checked out by a vet if you're worried. But it's definitely a nice way of communicating. So purring generally is taken to be a positive behaviour, and for the most part it is. But there is more research now showing that there are different types of purrs. So yes, if your cat's on your lap and you're stroking her and she's purring away and settling down, then that is probably a contented purr, and that's like the traditional purring. But does your cat also purr when you're getting her food ready, or when you're when you're trying to work and she's weaving in and out of your laptop? Is she purring? Because you might find that purr sounds very different to the purr that you're hearing when she's on your lap. So often, like, a contented purr is quite low pitched, it's quite long and rhythmic and just like calm and relaxed, whereas a solicitation purr tends to be more high pitched and more like a higher frequency and maybe louder. I tried to get two examples here. They're just sound bites online, so I don't know how accurate they are, but it will give you an idea of how purrs can differ. So here's the contented one. So I can just envision that, like a cat like curled up on a bed somewhere, like being adorable. And the solicitation purr. So it's a little higher pitched, it's more rapid, and it's louder. So I wonder if that's more of a solicitation purr, but have a look with your cats and see if you can tell the difference between the two. There is also the suggestion that purring might aid healing, and this is because sometimes cats will purr when they're in pain, like really awful pain. And I remember my mum saying that when she took her cat to the vet that had been hit by a car, she was purring at the vet's, although clearly she was in so much pain, she was still purring. So it definitely is observed, and we really need more research to figure out what the function of that is. But it's such a sad thought, but the purr is not as obvious as it seems. I've put chirp or trill in here just because it's generally just a positive sign that you will see if like a cat comes to meet you or comes to meet each other, like a little trill. So that's something to be encouraged and a good sign. Hissing feels like it's a bit of an obvious one, but it's really misunderstood by lots of people, because I think when you see a hissing cat, you automatically think that cat's horrible and that cat wants to hurt you. But what it actually means is they want you to go away. So it's actually like a way of diffusing tension where they can, and to warn you, I don't want to hurt you, but if you don't go away, I might not have any other choice. So I feel like hissing is quite a good behavior, because obviously we want as much warning as we can get before anything bad happens. And if you are getting hissed at by your cat, that's a sign to back off. And it usually is quite a reactive behavior. Like, cats normally don't just hiss for nothing. They're like, it's in response to something. And normally, like, if you look online at cats hissing, it's normally because someone's put a camera in their face and they're hissing at it to go away. So that's something to keep in mind. These two pictures I just put on here because just a little personal bugbear is when you type in cats hissing into Google, try it. So many of them, cats yawning. And so the top one is a cat hissing, the bottom one, cat yawning. And obviously you can see from the differences in their whole body language, like in that top one, you can see the fur on end, you see the ears, the eyes are dilated. You can see like how the muzzle is shaped because she's hissing, compared to that bottom one who's just like a happy cat just yawning. So another example of where to take the whole context into account and not just look at that specific behavior, because just opening your mouth like that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. I put spit here, which is something that you might see. It's the same really as a hiss, which is just like, rather than a hiss being like long, sort of drawn out like noise, it's more of a like a, which is my impression. But you just might see it when cats are scared or fighting. It's the same sort of behavior as a hiss, but a little bit more severe. I think like a little bit more, like it suggests the cat's even more anxious or even more worried than hissing. Growling, I've lumped in here with hissing because generally it's the same sort of thing. It's another warning sign. I feel like it's less reactive or happens in situations where they're less worried. So, for example, it might happen when they're eating and someone's a little bit too close or another cat's too close they don't like. So it's not so urgent that they need to hiss and be like, get away from me. It's just more like, don't come any closer. I'm not okay with this. So another warning sign that is not a bad thing is just trying to diffuse tension where possible. Yowling, I put here along with caterwauling. I did have like a little soundbite for this as well, but I played it and my cat was really upset by it, so I decided to take it out for the benefit of all your cats. But you know what I mean? It's like when you sleep at night and then you hear like cats outside, and it's that really like noise. Like there's like really long drawn out, like they're not meows, like they're there. That's all of so a yowl pretty much sums it up. So the yowl is like the long drawn out meowing noise. And it tends to happen where aggression is about to happen or is happening. And the caterwauling is when it escalates that much further and it's more like, and you'll often hear that when like during like a wrestling or like oh my God, I'm being attacked, this is happening. So yeah, both very negative behaviors. Like I often say to people, if they're seeing fighting in their homes between their cats, are they hearing this sort of vocalization? Because if they are, then it's very serious, because you don't often hear this sort of like this level of aggression in houses. So I often feel like if this level of vocalizing is there, then the relationship between the cats is not good at all. Okay, so finally, moving on to olfactory communication, so communicating by smell. Generally, this just goes over our heads, but it's really fun to look at and it can give us a good indication of how our cats are behaving and can help us understand them a little bit better. So cats have scent glands throughout their bodies, and they will use them to mark their territory and to mark other people as part of their social group. And if they're worried about something, then they can use it to help themselves feel better. So the way that they communicate through scent is by facial marking. I'll go through these in a moment. So facial marking, body rubbing, so like they're rubbing the whole side of their body against something or someone. Scratching, and that, I don't mean like scratching somebody, like hurting somebody, but like stropping, like they would do on a scratch post or on the carpets or furniture. Euromarking or middening, which is marking through poo. So let's have a little look. So face rubbing and body rubbing, these are the ones that we love. These are the ones that have no downside. We want to encourage these as much as possible, and super appropriate to do this inside the house. This is the marking that we want to encourage. So they have scent glands like in that little bit of space between, like above the eyes and in front of the ears, where the fur is really sparse. They have scent glands there, and along their like cheek and chins and like that side of their faces. So if you've got a cat that loves doing this on you, it's lovely. Like Figgy loves doing this on me. So if I put my face near him, then he'll start like face marking on me, which is really sweet. And if I hold my hand out towards him, he'll rub his face on my hands. So this is like a really nice behavior in terms of like really cementing that scent marking, but also helping us to make sure we're interacting them in a really good way, because like lots of cats love being stroked around these areas because that's like feeds into their marking. And so if we focus your stroking around like the chin, behind the ears, like on the cheeks and on the head, that's usually well accepted by lots of cats. So as I mentioned, it's used in defining territory and social cohesion, so marking other members of their social group. So as much and encourage this as much as possible inside the house. And like even as they're like sleeping in places and using the cat trees to like sleep in the little hammocks or the little beds, or even if they're just sleeping on the sofa or sleeping on your clothes, then they're leaving their scent behind, and it's really helping to cement that group, like harmonious group scent between everyone in the household plus the territory that they're living in. Cats also have scent glands in their paws or between their paw pads. So when they're scratching on something, then they're leaving their scent behind. So this is really important when we're looking at stopping cats from scratching the sofa or carpet and things, because what you'll find is it might not necessarily be that they want to scratch on the sofa. It could just be that actually this is the perfect place to leave a mark. I don't want to wee there. Face marking isn't really cutting it, so we're going to scratch on that as well. So like in my house, right opposite our living room door is the end of the sofa, so it is the perfect place in the territory to put a nice little mark there, because it's the first thing you see when you walk into the room. And the sofa in the living room, it's a very important part of the territory. It's where we all hang out together, and it needs to be heavily marked. So we've now put a scratch post there, and it is being used to death. So there's definitely a marking element to that specific behaviour, rather than he just wanted to scratch on the sofa rather than on the scratch post. So something to bear in mind. Obviously, I would recommend having lots of scratches around so that they can A, maintain their claws on them, and B, they can mark this way, especially if you've got a sprayer, because sometimes being able to mark through scratching replaces their need to mark through weeing. So something to bear in mind, and that can be really helpful. So this brings us on to urine marking. And this is when cats will mark their territory using wee. So they normally spray it against a vertical surface, and generally it's smaller marks. It's normally not like the size of a whole wee, although sometimes it is. But what I would say about this is that if it's happening outside, then I would just consider this totally normal behaviour. Like, it makes total sense for them to mark their territory outside using wee. This is because they tend to know that their garden or next door's garden or the outside space generally will probably overlap with other cats' territories. So of course they want to make sure that they've marked it and they've established their territory for other cats to come and investigate and to suss out who's in the area. And likewise, they'll probably be sussing out other cats' marks and being like, okay, like next door's cat was here this morning, and they can get a gauge of who's out there and whether they're a threat. So this is a really safe, low-risk way of communicating with other cats in the area, because they're not coming face to face, there's no risk of fighting, and it makes total sense to do that. So if your cat is marking outside and you see it, then I'd just leave them to it. It doesn't make any difference to their behaviour. It doesn't mean they're more likely to mark inside. But when it does happen inside, that usually is an indication that something's not quite right, because when they're inside, they should feel like their core territory, like their inside space, should be a safe place that they don't need to worry about. And the facial marking and scratching is marking enough. So if they feel like they have to up their game in terms of urine marking, then that's an indication that they feel like there's a threat there. So I often ask people, like, what's happened? Have you had another cat that's come in when they're not welcome? Have you got cats intimidating yours from the outside? Do they get along well with the cat they're living with, or are they fighting for territory there? Sometimes it can be environmental stuff, like you're having like the house renovated and suddenly they're like, my territory, it doesn't smell right, it's not normal. So urine marking in this scenario is more of like a reassuring mark to the cat themselves to help them feel better. I often think it's like when you move into a new house and then you're like, oh, it doesn't quite feel right yet. And then you put up your pictures and you redecorate it the way you like and you put your furniture in and you're like, oh, okay, cool. This feels totally better now. So it's the same sort of thing. But yeah, definitely a behaviour we want to encourage. Well, I say encourage, like let it happen outside, but inside's definite no-no. The only other thing to mention here about urine marking is to make sure your cat's neutered, because if they're not, then there's that added motivation to attract a mate. So we can take all of that out of the scenario by neutering. So that's definitely worth doing. Lots of reasons. And finally is middening, which is marking with poo. And to be fair, I don't see this very often. It doesn't often happen inside, because cats, although they're wee everywhere sometimes, they sometimes, like I see a lot of cats that will use the tray 100% of the time for poo, but they will wee in other places. So I feel like they're particularly meticulous when it comes to keeping their territory clean in some instances, but not others. But this will be when you'll see like a poo that's left right in the middle of someone's lawn. And it's very obvious that this is my mark that I've just left here. And they do have scent glands around their bums, and there is pheromones deposited into the poo that serve that, like, mean that they can use that as a mark. So that's just another method of communication. I guess there's not much known about that, really, to be fair, because it's so difficult to know when it's a mark or when they just needed to poo in the grass. But that's something to bear in mind as well. Cool, so that's brought us to the end of the webinar. So I just have a few final thoughts I'll leave you with before we go. Firstly, is to look at the context in which you find your cat in. So rather than picking out their ears, their eyes, their tail, and looking at that specific part of their body, it's really important to look at their body language as a whole and look at what they're reacting to in the environment, because that's going to give us a really clear picture of how they're feeling. Secondly, remember that we're dealing with a really unique species. Like, they're descended from a solitary animal, and now they're living in our houses with other cats and with other species. So it's really important to remember that they haven't had time to evolve really good method of communication with us, and the way they are good at communicating, scent marking, just goes totally over our head. So the responsibility is on us to put the effort into learning about these animals and deciphering how they feel, and to pick up on the really subtle cues. So you guys are going to be great at this because you sat through this entire webinar. I know it. And just remember that every cat's an individual. There will be cats that act differently, and you know your cat best. And there might be things in this webinar that don't apply to you. But remember, learn what's normal for your cat, but keep in mind that every cat is different. So in future, if you go out and meet other cats, they might not act in the same way as your cat at home. But hopefully there's been some advice in this talk that's been helpful. So all that remains is for me to say thank you very much for listening. Thank you if you stuck it out this far. You're amazing. And a reminder that my book is available, which is called The Book Your Cat Wishes You Would Read, which includes lots of information on cat behaviour, cat body language, cat behaviour problems, cat everything. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more information on cats. I post videos every Saturday. Thanks again. Don't forget to leave a comment. I would love to hear about your cats, and I would love to chat about them with you. But until next time, I will see you again. Take care. Bye.